Hello. We have been discussing about the early Greek philosophers, specifically Heraclitus on his theory of soul. We shall be continuing this topic a little bit more here. This is Dr. Ananya Barua, Associate Professor in the Department of Philosophy, Hindu College. Now, Heraclitus have had implied that the soul is also a manifestation of fire. And when talks about fire, we must understand that Heraclitus on fire is nothing but arche of change. Heraclitus proposed that the fire is the underlying principle of all things. That was his version of arche. In fragment B30, Heraclitus quotes, "This world, the same for all, no god nor man made, but it always was and will be an ever living fire, kindling in measures and going out in measures," which means that fire is eternal and yet always changing. It is a symbol of transformation, consuming and creating in the same act. Unlike water of Thales' arche or Anaximenes' air arche, fire cannot be possessed. It is a process, not substance. So when Heraclitus talks about soul as fire, Heraclitus makes this bold claim, quote, fragment B11.8, "A dry soul is wisest and best," and implicitly, through others, the soul is fire-like. Interpretations are that the soul as a dynamic process, fire is never static. It burns, flickers, grows, wanes, always in motion, process. Likewise, the soul is not a fixed substrata or substance or thing, but a dynamic becoming. It is active, not passive. It transforms, suffers, and knows. This suggests a proto-existential view. The soul becomes what it does, not what it is statically. Soul as self-sustaining light. Like fire, the soul illuminates and consumes. It can reveal truth by aligning with logos, but it can also be corrupted or dimmed when soaked in desire or ignorance, wet souls. A dry soul in Heraclitus' terms also refers to a soul purified of passions, one that burns clearly in tune with the cosmic order, unlike the wet soul. Fire and intelligence. In ancient Greek thought, fire was linked with intellect and breath. The Stoics would later adopt this, seeing the soul as a fiery breath, structured by logos. Thus, fire symbolizes reason, which is the soul's rational core, vitality, its aliveness, transcendence, its link to the divine and cosmic logos. So Heraclitus' doctrine of flux, where he says everything flows, nothing remains. You cannot step into the same river twice. Becoming is the true nature of reality. All things are in constant transformation, including the self. The soul does not exist outside of change, but is constituted by it. Just as fire maintains its identity through change, so the soul is stable only by transforming. It is a self-revising, living structure, not frozen essence, but burning presence. In the PPT as displayed here, if we talk about the attributes, the nature of fire, we know that it is to do with an ever-changing, consuming, renewing, and its comparison with the soul, with fire, we see that it is also always becoming, never static. The structure of both fire and soul, now we see with the fire, there is no fixed form, but coherent. Similarly, the structure of the soul, there is deep logos, yet it is unfathomable. Now, the functioning of fire is that it illuminates, warms, destroys. Similarly, the functioning of soul is that it understands, animates, transforms. Further, when we talk about the attribute of health of fire, we know that it needs balance, not too much or little fuel. Similarly, the soul is a wise soul, is a dry, balanced soul. Now, the philosophical implications of this is that the soul, there is no static identity, which means that the soul is like fire, has no fixed substance. It is a movement. This challenges essentialist views and anticipates later existential and process based philosophers. Further, the soul here relegates under the unity of change and continuity, which means that the fire retains identity even as it changes. The soul too remains itself through change, pointing to a deeper law of transformation, logos, that binds all becoming. Ethical and spiritual work, which is to lend to one's soul, is like tending a sacred fire. Keep it dry, that is, keep the soul clear, rational. Feed it wisely with insights and restraints. Let it illuminate both self and cosmos. The closing reflection here we can see is that Heraclitus's comparison of the soul to fire and becoming is not simply poetic, it is ontological, epistemic, and ethical. The soul is deep as the cosmos, bright as fire, restless as a flame, and called to live wisely within change, not against it. So these resonates across traditions, from Agni in the Vedas to the divine spark of Plotinus to the burning bush in the Hebrew Bible. This insight anticipates later developments in Platonic introspection, Stoic rational psychology, and even Christian mysticism, where the soul is seen as a divine spark, immeasurably deep, and the site of truth. So, when we talk about the soul as fire and becoming, we see that the flickering flame within the concept is, in closing remarks, is that across civilization and spiritual traditions, the metaphor of fire has been invoked to articulate the nature of the soul. For Heraclitus, the soul is akin to fire, burning, becoming, illuminating, consuming. Thus, the fire is not chaotic, but structured by logos, which is the rational principle that governs both the cosmos and the self. Even in the Vedic and Upanishadic traditions, the Agni too is sacred, the messenger between the human and the divine, the principle of transformation and the inner flame of consciousness. This east-west convergence reveals a profound shared insight that the soul is not a fixed entity but a living process, a spark of universal intelligence, and a path to liberation through transformation. So, yes, rightly so, for Heraclitus, the soul is as ever living fire, where as he quotes in fragment B45, you would not find the limits of the soul, even if you traveled every road so deep as its logos. Now, there is another thing that we must understand, that the later Vedantic thought, especially Advaita Vedanta, internalizes Agni as the self-luminous Atman, the unchanging witness that underlies the changing phenomena. This seemingly contrasts with Heraclitus's flux, yet both traditions affirm that what appears as change has a deeper order or truth, logos or dharma. So again, if we reflect on the PPT here, we see that the tradition of Heraclitus, the soul as fire, is becoming, order or depth. The ontological implication about soul is that it is dynamic, logos infused, unfathomable. epistemic or ethical implication has been that it is self-knowledge aligns with cosmic logos. Wisdom is dryness. For Stoicism, on the other hand, the soul as fire, we see they talk about pneuma, which is the divine fire. Ontological implication is that the soul as spark of divine rationality, and epistemic ethical implication is live according to nature. Reason is inner fire. Further, in the tradition of the Vedas or the Upanishads, we see that Agni is considered as sacred mediator for sacrifice. Ontological implication, fire is both cosmic and inner self. Epistemic or ethical implication, knowing Agni leads to immortality, amritatva, inner purification. And last but not least, in the Advaita Vedanta, Atman is equivalent to self-luminous inner light. Ontological implication, immutable consciousness amidst change, and the epistemic ethical implication, realizing self as Brahman brings moksha or liberation. So we see that Heraclitus sees soul as ever becoming, while Vedanta posits an unchanging witness. Yet both emphasize a hidden depth that others or illumines experience. So Heraclitus's logos parallels the Indian concept of rita or dharma, an ordering principle that is not merely natural law but also moral and spiritual rhythm. Thus, the metaphor of tending the inner fire, purifying the soul through discipline, insight, and alignment is shared across both traditions, whether it leads to wisdom, Sophia, or liberation, moksha. Thus, the concluding remarks here, we can note that tending the fire within to know the soul is not just to pin it down, it is to enter its flame, to witness its dance of becoming, to feel its burn and brilliance. In Heraclitus, the soul is a river of fire. In the Vedas, it is the altar where the divine descends and the self ascends. Both traditions whisper, the fire is you. Tend it, know it, become it. So this had been largely about Heraclitus's theory of soul, and quickly I would now be introducing at this stage about yet other philosopher who is Parmenides. Now, before I begin with Heraclitus and Parmenides, let me start with a quote of Heraclitus, where Heraclitus says, quote, "Conflict is justice, soul is deep." And Plato says, "Harmony is found in recollecting what never changes. Yet across time, the fire still burns. Perhaps both are right. The soul is the fire that seeks form and forgets itself to find itself again." Now we must understand that as much as Heraclitus and Plato methodologically go separate ways, in fact Plato we see there's more mapping with Parmenides, but it is interesting that had Heraclitus not been there, Parmenides too wouldn't have been here. It is a continuity of thought, and in this continuity, more than adverse complete oxymoron, this is where I would now begin Heraclitus and Parmenides, the basic, the methodology or the methodological difference between them. Now, the methodological difference between Heraclitus and Parmenides, before I even begin to analyze who Parmenides is, let us understand that the methodology, there has been foundational contrasts in early Western philosophy between both of them. Both are pre-Socratic thinkers, yes, grappling with the nature of reality, truth, and knowledge, but they arrive at radically different conclusions, primarily because their methods of reasoning, ontological assumptions, and epistemological commitments diverge deeply. Quickly, before I begin, let us look at this PPT here. Experience versus rational necessity. Now, the starting point of Heraclitus has been about observation of nature, change, opposites and flux. For Parmenides, on the other hand, it has all been about logic, necessity, and the impossibility of non-being. Now, the approach for Heraclitus has been empirical philosophical, which is engaging with the world of appearance and motion. For Parmenides, it has been rational, metaphysical, which rejects appearances and trusts only pure reason. The key fragment between Heraclitus and Parmenides is that for Heraclitus, everything flows. For Parmenides, what is, what is not, is not. Now, with this PPT that we have discussed, let us understand that Heraclitus embraces change as fundamental to being. He sees conflict, becoming, and transformation as the very structure of reality. Some of his quotes are of Heraclitus: strife is justice, the path up and down is one and the same. Fire is his symbol of this ever-changing yet ordered world. Parmenides, by contrast, denies change altogether. He claims that being is eternal, unchanging, indivisible, and that change is an illusion. Parmenides, it neither came to be nor will it perish. He sees movement and becoming as deceptive illusions of the senses. If we look at the epistemology PPT here, logos versus rational deduction, we see that for Heraclitus, the epistemic method. For Parmenides, it was a logos, a deep harmony of reason within the cosmos that must be intuited and interpreted. For Heraclitus, it has been the axiomatic reasoning. Knowledge arises from strict logical deduction, excluding contradiction. We also see the attitude towards changes. For Heraclitus, the senses are completely unreliable, only reason reveals truth. But for Parmenides, the senses are limited but not entirely deceptive if understood via logos. I just want to make a clarification here. The section under Parmenides belongs to Heraclitus and the section under Heraclitus belongs to Parmenides. There has been a mistake here. Similarly, the path to truth under Heraclitus, it is true insight into the oppositional and harmonious nature of reality, and for Parmenides, it is true rejecting appearance and holding fast to the way of truth. Similarly is the case in the previous PPT. Okay, now when we talk about the ontology becoming versus being, we see that Heraclitus's ontology is dynamic. Reality is a unity of opposites. Being is always becoming. Fire is both literal and symbolic, the primal substance and metaphor for flux. There is order within flux grasped through logos. Now, Parmenides' ontology, on the other hand, is static and monastic. There is only being, eternal, unmoved, complete. Change, time, motion, and multiplicity are illusion. There is no many, only the one. Again, if we are to talk about the two poles of Western thought, Heraclitus anticipates. We see that dialectics of Hegel or process philosophy of Whitehead, phenomenology of change and conflict, Eastern metaphysics, Taoism, becoming have all been the legacy. For Parmenides, on the other hand, Parmenides anticipates rationalism of Descartesian or the Cartesian dualism, the ontological absolutism of Spinoza, Plato's world of unchanging form, metaphysical dualism. So those have been the legacy of both Heraclitus and Parmenides. Now, if we again have a look at the PPT here, we see that for the category of reality for Heraclitus, it is flux and becoming. For Parmenides, it is immutable being. Change for Heraclitus is fundamental and ordered. For Parmenides, it is illusory and impossible. For method, the logos and intuition of opposites. For Parmenides, it is pure rational deduction. Similarly, for epistemology, for Heraclitus, it is the partial role for senses plus deep insight. For Parmenides, it is total rejection of senses. The style of Heraclitus is obscure since it is to do with aphorisms. For Parmenides, it is philosophical poem, way of truth versus way of opinion. The symbol for Heraclitus has been all about fire, river, bow, the lyre. For Parmenides, it is sphere, one, being. We see that Heraclitus' reality is becoming, truth is insight into its harmony. For Parmenides, reality is becoming is not. Truth is pure reason beyond perception. Now, with this background, we are good to go about who then is Parmenides. Parmenides of Ilia was a pre-Socratic Greek philosopher who has been the founder of the Eleatic school, 515 to 450 BCE. He was born in Ilia, which is now in Velia in southern Italy, a Greek colony. His only known work is a philosophical poem entitled On Nature, of which only fragments survive. Major contributions of Parmenides has been the radical claim, which is change, multiplicity and becoming are illusions. Being is eternal, ungenerated, imperishable, indivisible and immobile. He is often considered the first metaphysical absolutist in the Western thought. He used pure reason, logical necessity over sensory evidence. He influenced Plato, especially in the Parmenides dialogue, later metaphysicians and formal logic. Now, how did Parmenides go beyond Heraclitus? From paradox to ontological absolutism of Heraclitus, we see that Heraclitus had embraced paradox, the unity of opposites, which is, fire burns but also illuminates, the road up and down is the same. Parmenides, on the other hand, rejected paradox and affirmed strict logic. Either being is or it is not. There is no in between. For Heraclitus, everything flows. For Parmenides, it is necessary to say and to think that being is, for being is and nothing is not. The methodological leap from logos to reason alone. For Heraclitus, logos is experiential, mystical and intuitive, grounded in nature's contradictions. For Parmenides, it is replaced with pure deductive reasoning, independent of sense experience. Heraclitus mixes poetic insight with observation. Parmenides presents a formal epistemological break, the way of truth. Reason alone tells us only being is, the way of opinion, sensory appearance, which deceives. Now, from becoming to being, for Heraclitus, reality is becoming, always in tension, always changing. For Parmenides, becoming is impossible. What is cannot come from what is not. If something changes, it must come from non-being, but non-being cannot exist. Therefore, only unchanging being exists. This is a drastic ontological shift. Heraclitus dances with fire, Parmenides extinguishes the possibility of fire changing at all. From fire to the sphere, with Heraclitus we see that fire is a fundamental principle, symbol of flux and transformation. For Parmenides, the sphere is metaphor for being, homogeneous, perfect and complete. Now, some of the primary sources of Parmenides has been the Parmenides poem on nature. Only fragments survive. Primarily, we have known him through Simplicius, who is a Neoplatonist commentator in 6th century CE, and the main divisions are proem, an opening or allegorical journey to the goddess, which is revelation of framework, aletheia, the truth, the metaphysical doctrine of being, doxa, the opinion, cosmogony that mimics traditional Greek cosmology but is deemed false and is collected in fragments der Westgothiker in Decay's work. Now, the primary sources also, if we are to talk of Parmenides, we find it in Plato's dialogue entitled as Parmenides, a dramatic encounter between Parmenides and a young Socrates. We also see dialogue of sophists and Theaetetus wrestle with the implication of Parmenides' monism. Now, in Aristotle's work, we find Parmenides' traces in metaphysics, especially Book 1 on earlier philosophies, entitled Physics, and on generation and corruption, where he discusses and critiques Parmenides' view on change, and also definitely on Simplicius, Neoplatonist philosopher, who preserved most fragments of Parmenides' poem in his commentaries. So, if we look at this PPT now, we see that the aspect of ontology of Heraclitus, as depicted in the PowerPoint here, is all about becoming or flux, and Parmenides, it is all about being, unity, or permanence. The method of Heraclitus has been logos plus insight. For Parmenides, it has been rational deduction. For epistemology, for Heraclitus, it is the partial role of senses. For Parmenides, it is the total rejection of senses. For symbol, Heraclitus, it is fire and river. For Parmenides, it is sphere and being. Now, the language used by Heraclitus have been aphoristic and paradoxical. For Parmenides, it is systematic, logical poem. View of change, necessary, real. For Parmenides, it is illusory, impossible. The legacy of Heraclitus has been felt in Hegel, Heidegger, and process thinkers. However, the legacy of Parmenides is largely felt with Plato, rationalism, ontological monism. The final thoughts or reflection has been that where Heraclitus sees mystery in the soul and the fire of becoming, Parmenides freezes the cosmos into a logical, crystal, smooth, unchanging absolute. His move is not just a philosophical difference. It marks the beginning of metaphysics as rational necessity, separating sense from truth, in a way echoes true all of Western thought. So this is interesting, where we see that Parmenides had continued vis-a-vis after Heraclitus in a potentially divergent way. We will be picking up Parmenides more in our next lectures in a detailed way. Thank you so much.